Welcome to Haunted. Sorry about that. Welcome to Haunted. Little wee tiny glitch because I could hear myself, which is, how I feel so sorry for you, because when I can hear myself, I drive myself crazy. So here we are looking at Haunted Objects, episode 5. The influences beyond the grave are a very hotly debated subjective area of any level of spirituality. In fact, some of the exaggerations and some of the stories are so out there that people are driving, especially with the internet age, for listenership, for revenue, basically. If they're writing blogs, the more sensational, the better. There's not necessarily a lot of research that goes into the actual history of things. So I've been quite careful to select things that have some verifiable facts around them. Not all of them are totally verifiable, but sometimes the person it came from has written a book, written articles, or they've been quoted in newspapers, which gives you some kind of lean into it not just being a blogger's exaggerated claim to get the advertising revenue on their page. So what we're looking at here is James Dean's Little Bastard. And no, there's no other way to say it because that was the name of the car. And of course, the interesting thing about this was, it was a real life ride. It was a very well publicized guy in his car. And the stories behind it, honestly, have to be a little bit more than just coincidence, I feel, personally. You can decide for yourself, of course. I'm not saying that the curse is real. You could determine that it's coincidence and based on the fact that it's a racing car, he's likely to die, etc. But it wasn't his racing car. So this is one of the common misconceptions about the Spider. It was fast, but it wasn't the fastest car he'd owned. He wasn't a new driver. He was a racing driver. He was a racing enthusiast. He had a Spider before it. He had a slightly smaller model. So fast cars and James Dean got along. It was the way he liked to live. It's the way he was. The other thing that I think over the years, even for a while I didn't realize, was one, he was not alone in the car when he got killed, and two, he didn't cause the accident. So we need to bear that in mind as we look at this. So it wasn't like he was driving too fast and lost control. Yes, he was driving fast, but there was an incident around that. And so there's a question from some people that think it was cursed prior to James Dean, and then you've got a whole pile of people who think it's cursed because of James Dean. So that's the interesting part right there. It was a 1955 Porsche 550 Spider, a beautiful little car, as you can see in this picture. It drove him basically to his untimely death, and the car itself was customized by George Barris. So I've got no images. I couldn't find any of what it looked like before it was bought by James Dean and customized. So while there may be pictures out there from car enthusiasts checking it out and all the rest of it, at this particular stage or at this particular moment, I couldn't find any, but you can go look. But George Barris, just so as we're understanding who's who, he's the designer of the Batmobile. And you're talking about the original Batmobile, not the more modern ones. I mean, he may have done something a bit later, but he'd be pretty old. And, of course, the Munsters coach, their car. The interesting thing about those two were they're very unique looking vehicles and for their time. So remember, we're talking in the 50s here. So you're talking the black and white versions, just so we understand, or if it went to color in the 60s, you are talking that period of time. So he had a name. He knows how to customize cars, so we can't be saying too that the customization of the car was ultimately what led to the death. It was really more about how it looked. It was Jeffries who added the car's 130 racing number on the hood, doors, and engine cover, and now and the now infamous title Little Bastard badge, which is on the back of the car. It's a really cool thing. A little bit about Dean, James Dean. He hit Hollywood in 1951, landing a series of bit TV roles before shooting to stardom, really, with his first film role in 1955's The East of Eden. He would only star in 3 movies altogether. So Rebel Without a Cause, of course, which was probably the most iconic movie that he made, and Giant. A fast car enthusiast, he'd been working hard to build a racing career. So he had been driving and working. Now, the chances of dying in a car as a racing car enthusiast are actually a little lower than you think off the track, just so as we understand that. Off the track, yes, they might like to drive fast or whatever, but they're very skilled drivers and very often traditionally, even though they will go fast, they have a tendency to be a little more cautious on the road. They understand that the road's not made for racing, etc., but they know how to handle their car in a difficult situation. So the only reason I bring that to the fore was because over the many, many years, I've repeatedly heard little comments about, he was destined to die because he'd have been a maniac behind the wheel, etc. If you go and have a look at racing car drivers and their domestic accidents, you'll find that it's not really that common. And I think because if they do get into a sticky situation and they're not driving as fast as they would on the track, that they do also understand a little bit of how to get out of that sticky situation, or at least minimize the damage. He had his mechanic, Rolf Wazarick, in his car on the day, and they were on their way to a race in the Salinas in California. And it was an early evening accident. It really wasn't late. It was only around about 6 p.m., somewhere in there, just a few hours before he'd been ticketed for going 65 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone. Now, that's to be understood that while he's going 10 kilometers faster, that doesn't necessarily, we all do, 10 miles, sorry, we all did that sort of thing. We all do that sort of thing. There seems to be like this 10K or 10 mile, it doesn't seem to matter which, that people sort of take as a little bit of a risk factor. But he had been stopped, so one would think that that would be a little bit in his mind. They were speeding along Route 466. And of course here too, I didn't find police reports that said, he was being maniacal or he was being dangerous, because at the end of it all, he clearly wasn't. He had bypassed Bakersfield and its lower speed limits so that he could travel along. And while we talk about that, obviously, if you're on a highway, why would you get off? Let's face the fact there. Why would you get off if you're on a highway? It's straight, it's clean. In America, particularly so, I noticed when I was there, of course, that you've got most of the roads. Nowadays you have two separate directions. They're like two different highways. Back then, they were probably more like New Zealand and Canada, where you're both driving with just a line between you, or in a major city, they put a medium concrete barriers. But as soon as you get out of the city, then of course, off the main, the motorway, and you get onto the highways, then of course you get back to just one each side of the road kind of a deal. But everybody's still traveling at a fairly high speed. Head-ons are not the most common accident around either. So the accident was actually caused by the other driver. It was a 23-year-old guy, just a student, and he was in a Ford Ford Tudor coupe, however you want to put it. His car crossed over the median strip and crossed over the centre line, I should say. I don't know if you call them median strips, and the evidence of the tyre marks and everything that they took showed that Dean did attempt to drive around him, to move around him. He probably reacted fairly quickly, but the two ended up colliding almost head on. And so being a small little car, which you can see right here, you've got a situation where there's just no hope in that car coming up against a big old Ford. It's just not gonna go well. You've got two very exposed people in this driver's seat. I didn't find too much information about what happened to the other driver, but I can assume that he would have been badly injured, if not killed, and that's not our story today anyway. This is just giving you a little bit of background to determine whether and there's a reason why we've got this discussion as to whether it might have already been a cursed car. I couldn't find previous history, which is a real shame, but there were enough things going on there to make one wonder, or at least wonder. There just wasn't enough time anyway for him to get out of this accident, and the impact sent the Tudor broadsiding nearly 40 feet westbound down Route 466. So 40 feet with a big car hitting a small car. But head-ons are a double impact. That is to say, if you crash into something and it's stationary, you're going to crash into it with the impetus of the speed you're going. When two people are traveling on a highway and they're both doing, even if they're only doing 80 kilometers an hour, you're talking about an impact that's close to 160 kilometers an hour or 110 miles an hour. Or is it 110, 120 miles an hour, something like that. So when you've got two people perhaps driving around 80 miles an hour or even 100 miles an hour, I'm not too sure what they were doing, because nothing actually says what speed they were driving, because back then they didn't have the tools to sort of measure that as they do today. then you're talking an accident that potentially has the impact of 200 miles an hour, which is deadly. Full stop, it's deadly. Head-ons are known for killing people for that reason. So the Spire flipped actually into the air, and then it landed back on its wheels in a gully. Walter did survive because he was thrown out of the vehicle. James Dean was pinned in the car and so couldn't get anywhere, but he died not immediately. He died being transported back to the hospital. He'd only owned that car, for 9 days. And in that 9 days, it's reported, and there's a couple of actual comments from I didn't really want to list them all because there were a few, and I just thought, well, you end up name dropping, and I'm going to do the name dropping bit, but he was warned by a few of his friends that this car would kill him, and it was actually stated in a couple of memoirs at the time and in articles by friends that were in the star movie business. They were well known, so they weren't necessarily doing it for fame and fortune themselves or to get their names out there as a person who's, like a groupie might hang around and then say, I was there when this happened, to get themselves noted and noticed. These are people that were already famous making comments like this, and so that in itself is a little bit interesting. There was at least one Eartha Kitt told him that she had an uneasy feeling about the car when he bought it. So this is way before. It can only be 9 days before. He's only owned it for 9 days, and he's got a number of people. Charlie Nolan, his uncle, said that car would kill him. And I don't believe that they were talking about the speed of the car and about the driving, because the words used were interesting, and in the context, you'd be more likely to say you're going to kill yourself, if you get a fast car, kind of. That's the way it's worded was a bit interesting, that car will kill you. He had a girlfriend, Ursula Andress at the time, another well-known part-time girlfriend, I suppose, casual relationship. She was concerned. She was with Dean when he bought the car, and sort of said to him maybe she didn't feel comfortable with it. She didn't like the car. She sort of made it very clear to him that she just didn't feel comfortable around that car. Now, again, we need to bear in mind that they would have all realized that he had already owned a fast car. So we're not talking about a guy driving around in a saloon who's a bit of a maniac on the road, suddenly getting an even bigger, faster car or a faster, more out there vehicle. We're talking about a guy who already has fast cars, right? So we're clear. He's already racing. It's not something new in that moment. So it's this car specifically that the people around him were a bit concerned about. The warnings just are a bit of an eerie factor on their own, or even unnerving a little bit, I suppose. But his death wasn't the last of the strange occurrences surrounding the car. So basically, it's a bit like, that intuition maybe that people were sensing, and I know this does go on, which is where I would have put it. If it ended there, I would have said, people are intuitive around impending death, so they may have been uneasy because they felt his death in the next 9 days. And if anybody's sort of thinking you can't do that, you only have to look at the number of people. Forget those that get sick and cancel off a plane that crashes or a boat that's going to sink. The reason I forget those is because there's a certain percentage of that's going to happen anyway. On any successful journey, a certain amount of people are late, they miss out, they get stuck at work, they have to change their plans, they get sick, or somebody around them gets sick and they can't fly. They're really genuinely lucky because that plane crashed. But then you get others, and they're a little bit different, and they will say, look, I'm not too sure about this for you. It doesn't feel right. And when it doesn't feel right, they're intuiting that things are going to go wrong, not necessarily how it's going to go wrong, or even in their mind, they may not even have a formulated idea of what that might be, but they do have a sense that this is what's happening. And so with that being part of the equation, it's the next part on top of these that makes it a little bit more interesting or a little bit more concerning. This is just the back. It's the Porsche. It's the Spider, by the way, of the Porsche, and that's the painting on the back that named the car Little Bastard. So really quite an interesting choice, and it was part of his image. I think too we need to understand that you've got a person who has an image. The image in real life isn't necessarily as bad boy as the image is put out there, because just like today, when they want to sell an image for somebody, that image, they do it with things like Big Brother, reality TV now, where people are told and given scripts to be mean, to be nasty, to look like the bad boy person, if you like, and to do these to get into these kind of behaviors that are within the realm of the movie that they're going to do. The movie, by the time it comes out, we need to remember that as well. Even today, by the time a movie comes out, it's been in play for at least a year, maybe two, sometimes longer. And so that means the recording studios or the movie studios, they know what the movie is, they know what the character role is, and so they're quite happy, and were back then too, quite happy to play up to that and have a person get into the papers, get them a little bit of notoriety, make their image, bring their image into line with the movie that they're making. We're more open now to the idea that a really good guy can play a really bad guy, because we're more open to the idea of the acting side of movie making. But back then, getting into the papers was something that wasn't so easy. You didn't have the paid kind of publicity that you get now just by saying, we've got this movie, it's coming out in every TV and every radio and every channel is promoting that for you. Whereas back then it would be a little bit more last minute. If you wanted to get some free advertising, a free plug, then you wanted the paparazzi of the day racing around after your stars, really. And I know these days they have a tendency to romanticize that in the past and say, these women that were a bit loose, like the Marilyn Monroes, they didn't like them. Well, that's not true, because they kept casting them. And they cast them as sexy women. They cast them as naughty women. They cast them smoking and in love scenes. So they were not trying to make out that they were good girls being bad girls on film. They wanted them to be bad girls because that drew people out. That marketing has never been a subjective area. They've always had a pretty good handle on how to do this, how to make people want what you've got to sell. So that's the bit I'm going into there. So basically, after the crash, Barris is who you remember, the guy that modified the vehicle's appearance, modified it for him, decked it out, personalized it, all of that sort of thing. He purchased the wreckage of the car, and on multiple occasions he loaned it to California Highway Patrol to use in displays designed to discourage speeding, believe it or not. Interestingly enough, I see that as interesting because they've got a mangled car of James Dean, and so because he's famous, they get to show his car. But in actual fact, it wasn't his speeding that caused the accident, so I'm kind of fascinated by that side of it. It's like, how do they quantify that? Because even if he was going within the speed limit, if he had a head-on with a guy that caused the crash, the guy that came over the median strip, the guy that came over the center line in the middle of the road, then he would probably have been killed anyway. It wouldn't have mattered, is what I'm saying. It's a tiny little car. It would have just folded. Metal was better back then, but if you haven't seen the Ford Coupe, it's a big solid mother of a thing. There's no getting away with that. So it's an interesting and fascinating area for me. And just looking at this, you can see it's a tiny little car. You can see how the passenger might get thrown out. But you can see also how the driver would be stuck behind that wheel because there's nowhere for him to go. And we all know the front gets pushed in. Even in a modern accident, doesn't matter what you're driving, the front gets pushed in. And so crushed legs, things like that are very common. But look how close he is to that steering wheel. And there's a back of the car right behind him. It's a two-seater. There's no back seat to get pushed into. There's nowhere for the driver's seat to go. So really it is a death trap of a vehicle if it comes to that kind of an accident. But Barris later sold off the engine and chassis to Troy McHenry and William Eckerd. These were two physicians, which we'll talk a bit more about in a second. They were also racing enthusiasts, and the two surviving tyres, there were two tyres on the car that were still good. He sold them to a young New Yorker. Lots of rumours are surrounding the wreckage that have been spread, but the following ones that I've got here are the ones that are actually verifiable. There may be more stuff, but like I said, people exaggerate. They write something and they're doing it to get an audience without necessarily being too fussy. I think that if you stick to the bones of something that's are not only plausible but provable, you're more likely to be able to make an informed decision over whether you think this is all coincidence that happened to this from this vehicle and its bits. Remember that it's not the whole car now. So you've got this interesting side that only parts of the car are in other vehicles, or we'll go on. You'll see about the trucks as well, which is even more interesting. So in 1956, the two doctors, this is a year later, they were racing their cars with Little Bastard engine and chassis. McHenry's Porsche Spider, which is what he was driving, the same car, spun out of control and hit a tree, killing him instantly. You could say, well, he's a racing car driver, and that's quite likely to happen at some point, or it's definitely a possibility. But we'll put it there. But he did have the engine in there, because we go on to the next one where Estridge, the other guy, the other doctor, was seriously injured when his car suddenly locked up and rolled into a turn, and rolled going into a turn. So, yeah, we're starting to look at these are two guys that were involved with the car. But, yes, racing and accidents do happen more on the track, so more expected, but big deals. Barris still had two tyres from the 550 which were untouched. Which were untouched. Those are the two tyres I just mentioned. And he sold them. Both blew out simultaneously, causing the new owner's car to run off the road. This was the New Yorker who bought those tyres. And so they blew out simultaneously, causing the owner's car to run off the road. The accident was reported. Barris had kept the car in his possession and just sold the parts, and it caught the attention of two would-be thieves, you know. And these, I think, might have been souvenir hunters. I see lots of stories around calling them thieves, and the bottom line is there's not a lot you can do with that, except that you could be stealing it. There's two different things. You are stealing it. There's two different sort of ways to look at this. They were after the souvenirs themselves, in which case they were souvenir hunters. But if they're after the souvenirs to sell them, then they were just plain straight out thieving. I know both are thefts, but you understand what I'm trying to say there. One of the thieves' arms was torn open while trying to steal the steering wheel, while the other was injured trying to remove the blood-stained tartan seat. Now, that was recorded and reported too, but there's no real information on just how injured they were. So they could have been just in a hurry. We could go down there. But we're starting to clock up a few incidences now. Now, due to all of the incidences involving the little bastard, Barris decided to hide the car, but was convinced by the Highway Patrol, California, the CHIPS, whatever, to lend the cursed heap to a highway safety exhibit. The first exhibit was unsuccessful. Now here we're starting to get a little bit more spooky, as the garage that housed the car caught fire and burned to the ground. Which in itself is a question. You're looking at the wreck, by the way. It was a total wreck, this car, because it rolled, right? And it must have landed on its head. It got hit in the front, flung in the air, lands on its head, and then rolls back onto its tyres. This is the picture of it at the exhibit, and you can see it's pretty crunched up there, but doesn't look anywhere near as bad as that first picture. The first exhibit, so mysteriously, when the garage burned to the ground, it burned to the ground. And I couldn't find photos of that exactly, but the car after that went on to be shown, and there are pretty much, I couldn't find any images that showed it was scorched or any comments around that. It suffered virtually no damage from this fire. The next exhibition was at a local high school, and it ended abruptly when the car fell off its display and broke a nearby student's up, a person just standing there. So now we're starting to go, all right then, these are a couple of pretty serious things. Now, if you look at how it's displayed, the way it would fall off, you can see because it's held up on the side. But again, one would expect that they tried pretty hard not to have that happen. And all of the writing around this, all of these boards are about don't speed, be safe, you know. And later again, the curse sort of continues, I suppose. When the Spider was being transported, the truck carrying the car lost control, which caused the driver to fall out and somehow get crushed by the car after it fell off the back. Now, this is verified as well. I don't know that the first part is true. I was sort of thinking about it quite a bit, and I looked at a few different accounts. This is the one that comes out most, but there was one which sounded more believable to me, that he'd got out of his truck to check his load because it was shifting and it fell off onto him. And now I know that this happened because of the police report, but the way it happened wasn't quite described properly. So I'm picking that it would have been the latter, that it fell off as he checked his load rather than he fell out of his car, his truck in an accident, and then the car fell off him. The only other possibility is that the truck had the accident and he got crushed by the truck itself, or, got thrown out of the truck. We have to remember when we're talking about people being thrown out of trucks and cars and crushed, it actually wasn't uncommon back then because you didn't have to wear seatbelts. There were no laws about seatbelts, and they came in because of this sort of thing. People got flung out of cars and damaged when they might have been okay, and they might have been flung out through the windscreen or however they get flung out of cars, and the damage being done through that part rather than the accident itself. And that was not uncommon at all at the time. The car itself fell off 2 more transport trucks. That's 3 while traveling on the freeway. Fortunately, didn't injure anyone in those ones, but Chips decided pretty much they'd had enough. This car was a bit problematic. So after the New Orleans showing, Barris arranged for the wreckage to be shipped back to California, but the car never arrived. So we've got another little incident here of interest that it just never arrived. It was declared stolen, but the police were unable to explain exactly what happened to it, how it happened, or where it went. So basically, it's stolen, so they're not going to be able to say where it went, but nobody seemed to know just what went on. It's quite an interesting idea. Usually you can say it was stolen from here, it was locked up there, this happened, da-da-da-da-da, right up to the moment it was gone, but there's no story around it at all. It's just gone. It hasn't been seen out in the open since, and we say out in the open because there is a little bit more there. Save for the restored passenger side door that Barris had kept, the whereabouts of the rest of the little bastard has been a mystery ever since, and some say Dean's relatives hold the remaining mechanical parts. But, of course, a piece purported to be part of the car occasionally pops up for sale on eBay. In any case, there remains $1 million reward. I mean, that's significant, right? Offered from the Volo Auto Museum, if anybody wants to claim it, in Illinois for the return of the car, so long as it's verified by Barris. Now, I don't know if he's still alive, or Barris or a family member or whatever, but that was in play. The last article I saw about that was 2012. The Volo Auto Museum's tipster had a tipster ring up and claim that he was 6 years old when he saw his father and a few other men hide the spider behind a fake wall in a building located in Whatcom County in Washington. Museum employees say that his story sounded too good to be true at first, but he provided precise details that only an eyewitness would know, and he passed a polygraph test, which leaves the question, if he witnessed that, is that place still there? Is the vehicle still there? Does it lead them? Because as far as I've found, the car has not actually shown up. I know that would be news, right? That would be big news. The chances are pretty good that even if it was hidden there and they hid it there for a reason, that if it was verifiable, that person wanting the $1 million would have had them around whippity split to the property. But the fact that he was a genuine eyewitness is not really being disputed at this time. Eyewitness, though, doesn't bring the car back. So the chances are really good that if these people he saw, his family, hiding the car, had stolen it for financial gain, probably not because of the curse, I'd guess, but if they were doing that they would have pulled little bits and pieces off it to sell over time and to make money off it. But there's a question still around that. So we don't know. We don't know where it is. We don't know what happened to it. All of you psychics listening to the show, if you want to give it a punt and try and work out where it might be, your trail starts with Chips, and it may end or continue or start at Whatcom County in Washington with this man who saw it when he was 6 being hidden. There would be no other logical reason to hide that. So when it comes down to cursed objects and cursed items or haunted, take your pick which way you want to look at that. We've had a long fascination with that, and non-believers have actually turned their thoughts around with eerie incidences and things that happen. The word verifiable is a challenge. All you can look at really, and in a case like this, is these incidences happened around the car. They definitely happened around the parts. Would it would be reasonable. I mean, the only way to check whether, because it's a fast car, would be to go to somebody like Paul Newman, who did exactly what James Dean did, in fact, and look at people like him that drove fast cars, or racing car drivers that drive fast cars, and the amount of incidences around the crashed vehicles and, blah, blah. We can go on and on and on. But the question becomes, do you think that there's enough of what went on? And the fact that the car was broken down and split into different places, is there enough information there to determine that this vehicle itself was in fact haunted or was in fact cursed? And if it was it beforehand, or why was it? What could have caused that? And because we don't have that prior information of the car ownership or anything that went on before James Dean bought it, and clearly that's because they weren't famous, whoever had it before. And of course, as soon as it became famous, then there's a better record of what happened to the car. I mean, this could happen a lot, this sort of thing, with people that we don't know, that vehicles get bought and then moved and shifted and changed because they're considered to be a bit of bad luck, or because something happens around them. And then these incidences could happen to other people who move the vehicle along, not necessarily recognizing that, or even if they do recognize and feel that their car's cursed or haunted or whatever, they're not passing that information on if they want to sell it, right? So it all goes into the ethers, it all goes into the general populace, it all goes and disappears into nothingness. And we're left without that information. We haven't got anything to quantify it with. So the lucky part here is the fact that James Dean was famous, that he wasn't known to be erratic, actually, behind the wheel, that he was a skilled driver, skilled enough that his mechanic was happy to get in with him. Let's face the fact, people don't like getting in with bad drivers if they can help it. So there's a lot of interesting things going on there. He would also have wanted to, even if he drove fast, he'd have wanted to get his vehicle to the racetrack in one piece. He would have wanted to be able to drive around and not do any damage to that car before he got there. So there are a lot of questions really about that, and the fact that it was the other car that actually caused the accident. And that's primary to me, because if we are talking about a vehicle that was already going to carry some kind of negative information or history to it, then we also are talking about the fact that the guy driving it couldn't or needed to not be totally responsible for what happened. It then becomes more explainable, right, that he was driving too fast and lost control, but that somebody else came over the centre line and whacked into him is a completely different beastie altogether. So I hope you've enjoyed this show today. It certainly provides interesting questions. Next week we're going to have a little bit longer show. I know these have been a bit shorter and here and there, because we're going to be looking at the curse of Tutankhamun's tomb, or Tutankhamun, depending on who you're talking to. Now, this is an eclectic, broad-ranging story, and it travels around the world, and so there's a lot to talk about there. But it's a fascinating subject for me, because I first heard about Tutankhamun's tomb when I was pretty young, obviously, but I'd heard about the curse also quite young. There were a lot of stories and a lot of articles going back just about from the minute it was discovered and the minute it was opened and the minute things started to happen around that. And the questions, and something, again, that's well publicized like that, is the fact that there are plenty of tombs that have been opened. There are other tombs that have been opened by with mummified and pharaohs and kings and queens, that there haven't been this type of incidences around. There have been exhibits that have been shared around museums without incidences. So we can look at that and go, well, if it was general to the population, the death tomb kind of side of things, why is it then that it isn't a standard? Why is it just his? Why is it his that there is this curse around? We're going to look at what the curse actually is, because it's a written curse, and we're going to look at what the belief is around it, and then we're going to look at the incidences, which are numerous, related to King Tut's, the parts and the totals of King Tut's tomb, and the items that were taken out of it, what's gone on there, and what, where, who, and how. So I hope you'll enjoy that. We'll see you next week, and thank you for showing up. If you're on Spreaker or iHeart and you wish to have a look at the pictures here, you can pop along to energy-therapies.intuitalks.com or .intuitalks.com. Check out my show page, and you can see the recordings there, and there's a few images. There'll be a lot of images for Tutankhamun, but otherwise enjoy the show. You can leave your comments. You can leave your comments on the show page. You can sign in with Facebook, or just get an account and sign in and leave your comments, or you can leave your comments on Spreaker if you've got questions. Or if you'd like me to look at something, feel free to pop that in there. Next week's number 6. And it may be the last. I'm starting to struggle to find things I'm really interested in that are verifiable when it comes to haunted objects. Our next series, which will be starting after that, which I will decide next week, is going to be Planets of the Gods. Now, the Planets of the Gods, to me, is a fascinating area. We've got a lot of ufology in the ancient history, and I do mean ancient rather than recent history, of human human civilization. I'll say civilization, although, that's questionable. We've got a lot of interesting artifacts. We've got a lot of interesting information. And we've got a lot of myths. And when these myths, even if you're not a ufologist, when these myths are explored and looked at, the question becomes, where do we become so arrogant and so full of ourselves that we can talk about a God and say, this God is a real being that bestows love and light, or bestows religious favors, or whatever, depending on what you believe the God or gods are. Where is it that we ignore potentials of the past, where if a spaceship landed here today, we would look at it and go, oh, look, a spaceship. When we were looking at those things, I'm going to look at the origins of the words used to describe these things, the Hebrew that describes it. We're talking ancient civilizations that have nothing to gain by talking about weird things, right? Nothing at all to gain. We talk about civilizations that understood paying homage to Mother Nature, to the sun, to the sea, to the water, because these were life-giving things. So if they understood that and they paid homage to those, knowing exactly what they were, then why would they suddenly get all fanciful and decide, that people were dropping down from the sky and having a wee chat to us? We will also explore the discoveries of more recent years and discoveries that are old that have been reinvestigated as technology has improved, that we could explore different metals, unusual things, things that have existed at a time and place, or found in a time and place where they should not have been, as in according to our historical understanding of the earth, of the world, how it's been created. There's some phenomenal things that even if you're not a ufologist, you have to go, what is that doing there, and how did they do that? Now, I don't believe that man just got smart in the last couple of years, so we could have done it ourselves. But then we need to look at what was the technology of the day, which might lend itself to things like Atlantis and some other interesting areas where we believe that we've lost civilizations and had to start again. But then the question arises, would we actually have to start again? So that's all in the Planets of the Gods, which may be starting the week after next. It depends on whether I can find some other interesting cursed objects. Otherwise, next week, King Tut's or King Tutankhamun's curse and how it's affected literally maybe hundreds of people. Ciao for now.